programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly.
Wow.
In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and today we're going to continue on a multi-part series with Mr. Jorge Gutierrez. Mr. Gutierrez heads the Business Management and Operations Consulting Group, better known as BMOC. He is a tested leader with a passion for leadership and professional growth. The focus is on organizational alignment through results-based leadership and leadership development. The group helps individuals and organizations drive growth. This is accomplished by helping people achieve their goals. And today, in today's segment, we're going to be talking about the communications process in business. George, welcome back to Liberty Talk Radio.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. I appreciate you having me back again so soon.
Well, I'm really enjoying these because it's bringing me back to my younger years when I worked for large corporations as well as small companies. And when we talk about communications, I think anyone who gets hired should be married first. You'll learn to communicate really very well. Now, let me make one blanket comment, and then I'll let you go with it. Is it not true that managers have to learn to, in the communication process, is really to learn to listen? And when they talk about communications, managers typically talk about communicating out. Should not they be concerned about communicating in?
I think communicating in comes with hard work and maturity. So to truly develop the greatest communication skills, one has to become a great listener,
right?
And it was partly what we talked about earlier as we closed the segment. We have to control our tongues and sort of zip it so that we can listen, or at least hear, what our employees or team members are trying to tell us. But it goes beyond that. When it comes to listening. You have to be engaged in the process thereof. And engaged listening is truly a difficult skill to master because it sort of requires the listener to clear his or her mind from any solutions or from any intervention, within the communications process. You truly have to listen to what the other person is trying to say to you without judging anything that is being said to you, and then engage in the conversation. So having said that, let's look at this communications things technically. So here are the two things that I have learned in my short life, working for all kinds of different people and serving all kinds of different organizations, whether they be for-profit, non-profit, governmental, etc., whether it be large, small, or medium. What I have learned is that the most difficult thing that we do in business, as in life, is to communicate. I mean, so think about it. A carpenter can build, wooden structures. But when it comes time for him to communicate, to his team where he wants a nail to be, passed on to him, is whether or not he's got those communication skills, to have that nail passed on to him on how he addresses that particular communication piece of his or her work. So you said something that I think is worth repeating, Joe. I think if anybody wants to become a good leader, first they should be married for a while so they can understand the challenges of communication. So at the risk of getting in trouble, I'm going to tell you a little story that I'm going to share with everybody. Okay, this is and I've been married for, I think, 32 years. Sometime today, I came in to visit for a little while at the house, and my wife was very busy. And she looked at me, she goes, I'm really thinking about, moving where our grandson comes and visit from our living room, from our family room down into the basement, because there's a larger space and it's safer for him. And then, when he takes a nap and nobody interrupts him, nor does this napping interrupt conversation in the house. I said, okay. Well, that's what she said to me. She said, this is what I'm thinking about doing. So in typical male mode, I said, okay, well, she said she's thinking about it. Well, go ahead, think about it all you want to. I'm just going to walk away and go do something else because I didn't hear a request. I didn't hear a command. And then I walked away, and then I said, stop, turn around, go and do that for her, because that's what she meant. She wasn't just sharing information with me. She was very busy doing something else. And then when she said, and you know what I'm talking about, Joe, when she said, I'm thinking about this, she meant, hey, stop what you're doing, and I want you to do this right now. Now, thank God I was able to sort of process that and interpret it. So that takes me to what I really want to share with the listening and the viewing audience is about what is communications? How do we technically define this thing? Well, again, let's visualize something in our heads, because I think, we hear words, humans hear words, but they think in pictures. So I want you to think about the communications process, as a sender and a receiver. So there has to be a sender and there has to be a receiver. So what is it that the sender sends? Well, the sender sends a signal, or the sender transmits a signal to a repository that receives that signal. So what we have to understand, I think, if you go back to the story that I shared, is that depending on the mode of communication that we use, and it could be an electronic mode, it could be an email, it could be a text, it could be a telephone, it could be a video, it could be face-to-face, depending on how the receiver is feeling at the time, what's going internally in that receiver sort of organism, or human, if you would, that he or she will receive that signal and then they would interpret it. So if they're in a bad mood, they might take it out of context. If they're in a good mood, they may be more forgiving. But still, though, what is really and truly challenging our organizations today in business, and I think this is the heart of what you and I really wanted to talk about, is our country truly is multicultural, okay? So this country is filled with people that come from different parts of the world, and they possess English sometimes as a second language. So they don't and sometimes they have not even truly assimilated into our American business culture, if you would. So they are still receiving those signals, those communications, those messages that our managers and our leaders are transmitting to them, either via email, text, or even face-to-face. And they're receiving them, and they have to internalize them, and they have to translate them from whatever language, is the one that they use to think with, to the one that they're trying, to do business with. And something normally gets lost in the translation. And that's where conflict truly begins, because we don't listen well, and then we don't communicate well.
Well, how do we overcome the differences in our ethnic background, our geographic background? For example, I come from the streets of Harlem, New York, and we were kind of free in our language, and we had a certain language that we used. If I spoke the same way as I did when I was singing doo-wop back in the 50s in Harlem, as I and moved to the South and spoke that way, everything that I say would have a different meaning. It may be accepted in New York, it may be rejected in Mississippi, for example. And there's also ethnic backgrounds and people that come from closely knitted ethnic groups, where they speak a language that, quite frankly, I may understand, but I don't understand the meaning. So you have all of this cacophony of different languages and cultures using similar words, not the same words, but similar words, but trying to convey the same meaning. How do we tackle that?
So that is an excellent question. So we can't change ethnicity. We are who we are. We cannot change where we came from. That's just something that we don't control. But we can learn to adapt. And that adaptation comes through nurturing, developing, and honestly growing relationships that are open to both diversity, but not just diversity of, ethnicity, color, or what have you, gender, etc., but also diversity of thinking. So we have to have, sort of a tolerant way of exchanging how we feel about things and how we sort of look at things, so that we can assimilate and we can develop, to use your words, a culture of understanding that is able to communicate towards the achievement of common goals. So if we go back to the business environment, we need to be able to be, I think, open to self-development. So one of the things that I would admonish all of us to do is that, one of the indicators before we promote somebody, to higher levels of responsibility, is that we make sure, before we get them promoted, that they have the skills that are needed, to deal with the rest of their teams or the rest of the organizations, and that we do in fact have a culture, that is healthy for the organization and that is also embraced, by those who are serving in it. Now, I have no illusions about this. This is just hard. This is just not easy. So we're now in a time period of growth in our life, in our sort of geopolitical and business world, where data overload is just too much. So many are communicating without the human touch. So how do we make this better? I think you got to bring the human touch into this. So email, texting, Twitter, Facebook, and all these other social media things, they're great to advance, points of view. But when you truly want to develop a workforce, that is committed, to a culture of achievement, ethical, morally, and legal type of behavior that looks at our clients as the most important asset in terms of getting the repeat business, then we do go back to that conversation we've had before about leaders have a responsibility to make sure that they have the right growth programs within an organization, whether it be leadership or management, and that we incorporate these communication skills as something that, we pass on to those that are going to replace us in the future.
Yeah. There always seemed to be, when I was working in large corporations and medium-sized corporations, an organizational bias. A person of a certain level, let's assume someone of a very high level in the organization, an officer of the corporation, of a large corporation, could say something, could be the dumbest thing you've ever heard in your life. And what does everyone say? Guy's a genius. Guy, unbelievable. Why didn't I think of that? And yet someone maybe 3 or 4 steps down the ladder of the organization could say the exact same thing at the right time and say, now, how do you think we're going to do that? That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. I've actually heard that. In fact, one time I had perfect personal experience where, and I don't recall what it was, but I made a suggestion word for word. I remember what I had said at the time, and I was speaking to a controller of the large corporation. So we're talking about pretty high level. And I said things, and he turned around to me and he told me, he said, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And I kept my mouth shut. The room went silent. No one asked a question. No one said a word after that because no one wanted to be chastised. I was angry with myself for opening my stupid mouth, The very next week, he came back from an executive meeting, came back and he said, the treasurer of the company, said this. This was word for word what I had said the week before. And he said, now that's real thinking. Now you know why he's where he is and you are where you are. And I wanted to quit so badly, but I couldn't at the time. But I'm sure everybody who has ever worked for a large corporation has similar stories to that. But this was remarkable. It was word for word. I was stupid. This man's brilliant, word for word, same content, same meaning, and the whole bit. And there's a big problem. There's this organizational bias that colors what we hear.
Yeah, I think that's part of a sort of accepting, our own realities, and we all bring, our own personal bias into really everything that we do, and so I think I think a metric of maturity, if you would, from a leadership perspective, is to understand those biases, and to make sure that we don't act on those biases, because we are a product of our experiences, and I think you and I we've had so many conversations, but I remember one time we were talking like this, and I said, Joe, one of the things about modeling the proper behaviors of leadership that not many people are not aware of is that we communicate a lot more by our verbal language and by the things that we do than by the things that we do. So leaders are always on the spotlight, and what happens is, people are always watching and observing you, and they tend to mimic your behavior as opposed to the things that you're saying. So let's see if we can get somebody really, to call in or get upset at me again. Okay, so if you look at the world news, it's been reported in the news that we had a leader that passed away, died at the age of 90. Okay, we're talking about Fidel Castro. Well, if you look at the world dialogue, there is a lot of people that are happy about this, because they see a change for the future, maybe, for the country of Cuba in terms of social and geoeconomics. But then if you look at the other side of the world, then you have other countries that were influenced by Castro, according to them, in a positive way.
Right.
So many years ago, Castro committed resources to go help these countries that were fighting against apartheid. And if you remember, when Nelson Mandela came out from prison, he personally, thanked Castro for all the help that he provided, and actually had him, and he actually addressed Parliament, I think. So different people look at different behaviors and they mimic it. So we have to be careful, how we communicate and take our biases out of it, because somebody's always watching.
Yeah, I guess
if I was going to remove my bias out of all of this, which I have bias in this conversation because I was born in Cuba, and so we experience, what communism is all about in a personal level. So I wouldn't agree with those that are enamored with this particular person that died. However, I think it's important for the conversation because we become our leaders. So we go back, we have a responsibility to know how to communicate and how to nurture our communications.
Yeah, well, I guess then the lesson for management is that whenever they're speaking to a group in their organization and there's 30 people there may be 30 different messages being received. And if they recognize that, maybe they can communicate more effectively so everyone is on the same page. Would you concur with that?
Well, I agree with that. That's why when we talk about strategic planning and strategic communication, one of the things that we advise is you have to say it again, say it again, say it again. You have to repeat it, so that, because every time somebody hears it, you're right. They go back to this communications process that we talked about earlier. So we send this signal, they receive it, and they interpret it based on whatever mood they're in at that day.
Right.
So the more you repeat something, and there's some statistics that will suggest, a certain number of times to do this before people would actually become to internalize these things and get the buy-in that at least at the corporate level that you're trying to get. So you have to repeat it often, you have to repeat it well, and then you have to mean it, because people are watching the way that you're saying things.
Right.
So if you're not genuine, then your message is going to die midway.
It's going to die. You have no interpretation. Okay, George, well, we're past the witching hour. Once again, we'd like to thank you very much for spending time with us on communications, and we're going to have another segment very soon. So we welcome you back, and we hope you will accept our invitation to return.
Oh, thank you very much. I look forward to it.
Okay, thank you very much. Folks, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. With us today, we had Mr. Jorge Gutierrez, and talking about business communications. And we're going to have another segment with him soon. And we're going to have a 4-part series. This is part number 3. And we look forward to seeing him again. So you stay with us. This is Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well and stay tuned.